What's up, Workforce? Brian here, and today we actually have a new interview brought to you by TrustedReviews.com. They have posted an interview with Yoshi-P talking about Xbox, Fortnite, Phil Spencer, Phantasy Star Online 2. Really a lot of really good information, and I'll include a link in the description. Go check out this site. Give them some love for putting together this interview. But we're going to dive into the content. I'd love to know your thoughts on any and all of this below. I find this very, very fascinating. And if you hang out with me for a little bit, I think you'll find out why. So, obviously, the interview with Yoshi-P talking about Shadowbringers, Xbox, and rebuilding a Realm Reborn. For Final Fantasy XIV, it's been an extraordinary journey. One so perilous, it's a miracle that the MMORPG is still alive and kicking, let alone one of the biggest games on the planet. Spurred onward by the love of the brand and an unwavering dedication to its fan base, Square-Enix rebuilt Final Fantasy XIV from the ashes, nuking the 1.0 version from orbit and creating something truly astonishing in its image. A Realm Reborn launched in 2013 with critical and commercial acclaim and cemented itself as one of the genre's brightest sparks, even though it was built with the ruins once thought unsalvageable. And despite its warm reception, the game's director Yoshi-P is well aware that it is put together under dire circumstances, and if a second opportunity arises, they'd happily make some changes. So Yoshi-P says, after I took over the project, I made the decision to revamp 14. We created everything from scratch in only 2.5 years, and we really didn't have enough time to create the game. The development team was also in its infancy too. Many key members were building and expanding their skill sets, acquiring expertise required to compete with Western greats like Guild Wars and World of Warcraft, all while remaining true to the Final Fantasy name. This section right here, this line right here is incredibly critical, because often a complaint is leveraged around the spaghetti code. You have to, if you're going to make that critique, you have to really also take into account the severity and the speed in which that a Realm Reborn was created. So if you bring those two critiques together, if you bring the understanding of that, it's perfectly fine to have that critique and that understanding, but also note, like, this was that this was that 2-hour ability in Final Fantasy XI. This was that saving throw that they made, and wow, it sure did land, and Shadowbringers is a testament of that. But obviously, as they continue to work, there's things and issues that they're going to run into as they work on that. As long as you have that expectation, you end up having ultimately a better experience with the game overall. But that's just my opinion on it. So Yoshi-P continues that everything was so challenging to him, and he remarks that he was really bewildered at its origins, and pretty much he just went in and he couldn't stand playing it for more than 5 minutes, basically ordering them to shut it down. This was essentially a beautiful product of hubris. It took basically for granted the successes of Final Fantasy XI without paying attention to overall what has been going on in the genre and has been adopted for years. Now, A Realm Reborn changed all of this. Although he does call it a flawed gem cobbled together under extreme circumstances, they would likely never see that happen again. If we had full capacity and enough time to do it, in all honesty, we'd recreate everything from scratch. Yoshida said of its current iteration, which is still fun to play, but burdened by an inconsistent sense of pacing. Obviously, they says that at level 20 you fight Ifrit, and there's nothing really until Titan around level 32, and they had originally planned for Ramuh to be an encounter between Ifrit and Titan, obviously, but as time and conditions arose, that had to be cut from the campaign, and thus we didn't see Ramuh until later into the game itself. So Yoshi-P continues that between patches 2.1 and 2.3, there are so many side quests required for the main story that it made really players exhausted. And even if you cleared it along the way, it still ended up discouraging players, and they ended up lapsing out. They ended up leaving. And this is something we've seen happen in the game and in the comments and as we've engaged with everybody. So I can speak firsthand to just how challenging that can be for new players. The team is currently on working removing the unimportant things and actually streamlining the process, but it's really hard to revamp everything, but there's still some bits that they're planning on improving, and that's coming with patch 5.3. Okay, so this is where I think it gets really interesting. The recreation of A Realm Reborn could arguably be coming at the perfect time. Obviously, Final Fantasy XIV is poised to arrive on Xbox platforms here in the near future, an announcement few in the gaming landscape really saw coming. Microsoft's foray into the gaming space is infamously unpopular in Japan, eclipsed obviously by Sony and Nintendo on all fronts, and that really hasn't changed. So Yoshi-P, here's where he's talking about Xbox and Phil Spencer, and I think this is really interesting. When the Xbox One launched in Japan, there were no TV commercials or advertisements, so I thought they were just giving us a pass this time. Now, under the leadership of Phil Spencer, Xbox's attitude towards Japanese games has changed dramatically with the upcoming arrival of not only Final Fantasy XIV, but Phantasy Star Online 2. So it's really interesting to see Yoshi-P. That's the attitude that Xbox gave up on Japan. And that's the message they send to all these Japanese developers. If any Xbox player out there, even on PC, right? Like, because Xbox and PC, that at least Microsoft use that as one brand. Like, no wonder we haven't seen any Xbox, like, Japanese Xbox games, because even if they're not going to win Japan, the fact that they just kind of like abdicated and just like, all right, we're here, really just sent a message to developers that it wasn't really worth their time. Microsoft wasn't invested or interested in that. Now, Yoshi-P continues to say that Phil Spencer has made such an effort to make it actually possible, and now it's really cool to see it actually becoming a reality, and that's in regards to Final Fantasy XIV and Phantasy Star Online 2. So I think Phil Spencer's work in Japan is paying off, and I think this really shows it. Obviously, with so much coming to Game Pass, 14 finally coming to Xbox, and more. And Phil Spencer's actually out there right now as I'm recording this, so who knows what other relationships he can make. All I can say is I love Square Enix games. I'm not an Xbox fan. I'm not a Sony fan. I'm a Square Enix fan. Like, I literally follow them around, from Nintendo to Sony to wherever they go. It's still on Sony. So wherever they go, like, that's where I'm at. I love JRPGs and those kind of games. So I just wanted to kind of share that piece of it. So I just think it's fascinating in that regard. Now, Yoshi-P does make it clear that Final Fantasy XIV on Xbox must abide by one strict rule, being fully compatible with other platforms. So in theory, that you'll be able to log into the Xbox version at launch and find your characters intact and ready to tackle endgame content. Square Enix isn't ready to share launch details on the version, but given Xbox Series X is on the horizon, it's speculative that we might have to wait until that generation for us to hear more. However, this is me speaking, Brian here. I honestly think it's 5.3. Like sometime around the summer. Hopefully that's the case. We'll let you know as soon as we know more in that regards. Then the article continues, Shadowbringers, the MMORPG's latest expansion, has been heralded as one of 2019's best games by critics and players alike, sitting pretty with a 91 on Metacritic at the time of this writing. The reception caught the development team by surprise, but they aren't letting the cloud or letting this cloud their vision for the future. When the Metacritic score was first revealed, it really took everybody by surprise, and they were thinking it must be getting lower soon, but it just kept climbing. So during this development cycle, they really didn't set a goal regarding a review score, which is kind of different from other places in the industry. And when he said this, ended up basically taking a lot of pressure off the developers, and they essentially, he said they were having like panic attacks, and he's like, no, just keep doing what you're doing. And obviously, I think that really paid off, and it could be something that other developers maybe take into account, because when you tie reviews and that kind of expectation to like financial incentive, maybe that's something that's wrong with the industry. Maybe that's something that needs to change when it comes to development, because it puts an unnecessary amount of pressure because you're worried about what somebody thinks about this, and thus you don't end up allowing them to express their full, true creative being and thought. So I really like that line and how that kind of played out. The other thing Yoshi-P does here, and the article continues, that while he's, obviously praised as the savior of Final Fantasy, in which ways that, in many ways he is, but he's very humble, and I think this is important, and this is why I think gamers really do appreciate him and love him for that regards, is that he's keen to sing the praises of everybody at every turn. Shadowbringers is proof of how much the development team has grown, and while I will always remind them to keep creating the game with fun and to find as much enjoyment in that as possible. And that being said, I bet hitting that higher score with an expansion will be impossible. Honestly, if you focus in on what you're just doing, Yoshi-P, if you keep working towards that mindset of creating the fun and letting your team, trying to hire the best people so they can make amazing product, that's exactly what we need. That's what gaming needs. I think that's what the industry needs. We don't need to be sitting here worried about what some YouTuber says about it, right? We just need to be sitting here and saying, go create. And I think that can set up a new level of freedom. We've been metascored over metascored socially with, there's this social engineering almost that seems to be happening. And it's kind of neat to see when people can break out of that. True art, I think, can be expressed and enjoyed. Anyway, the article then says, because I'm the worst person on the planet, I couldn't help but bring up the subject of Fortnite. And he does this, and he brings up the subject of Fortnite, namely because in the article, And it's talking about how Fortnite Chapter 2 destroyed the world, and Yoshi-P goes on to say, yeah, like, we watched that happen. And it's so cool how it resembles the end of the era in Final Fantasy XIV. And then some people even came up to me and asked, like, have you seen this yet? Did you see it? And everyone is essentially well aware of it. The visual representation did really resemble what they were trying to do with destroying the world. And this isn't something new. This isn't something new that's happened before. Other games and even older games have done it before. Like, and then Yoshi-P kind of muses back on his time with Ultima Online, in which that he said that basically they flooded the world with tons of demons just going around and killing everybody, and players were fighting them off, and everybody died and were resurrected and died again. And ultimately kind of creates these moments in time that truly are remembered. And I, as a 1.0 player, as a legacy player, like, I do remember that so much. I do remember players forming and defending, and the lead up, and how, like, and that's why even in the Shadowbringer story, when they started having the crystals that were like devoid, it's just like of light or aether, I was like, oh man, I remember this, like, what's happening. And obviously with Shadowbringers, we have that story that kind of continues and concludes, and I'm not going to spoil it here for anybody who hasn't played the game yet. Play it. I think it's definitely going to be worth your time. So obviously, despite Final Fantasy XIV not being the first title to destroy the world in such a way, it is still arguably the most iconic way that that's been done before. It set the foundations, obviously, for success of a story, and by all accounts, it really shouldn't have happened. So Yoshi-P's really done a good job with that. And then the article goes on to remark about him and his son playing Fortnite, and that kind of experience that people with Fortnite were having. Obviously, Fortnite being a very popular game, and then him being able to say, yeah, this has happened in Final Fantasy XIV too, and then being able to bond over that, which I thought was really great. And so anyway, Final Fantasy XIV is still always available on PC, PS4, Mac, soon to be Xbox, hopefully soon. And then who knows, as we go into, we're going to get on PS5 and Xbox Series X. It would be really kind of silly for that not to happen, but there's no announcements at this time. Probably expect more come E3 and more. Guys, go check out the full interview if you want to read the article for yourself. Part of it's reading, part of this was reading it. Part of it's my thoughts and summary of basically what the article talked about. I truly found the interesting stuff about Xbox and how Phil Spencer's doing a lot of work. So whether you like the brand or not, that's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, we all have our preferences on what we like to play. That's kind of what it's about. It's what gaming's about. But I think if anything else, like, Phil Spencer is a guy who, if everything I've read about him, everything I've seen with him, he's a gamer first. And it's that mindset that I think helps everybody win. Whether you're PlayStation, whether you're Nintendo, whether you're Xbox, whether you're Stadia, or whatever platform you're on, when companies put gamers first, like Yoshi-P did with Final Fantasy XIV, I think everybody wins. I think you can, whether the game is successful or not, that's always the risk. But I think everybody wins ultimately when you're, because those good ideas bring about more good ideas, bring about that conversation. Anyway, for Work to Game, guys, let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. Thanks so much for checking out this video. Hope you have an incredible day. I love you very much, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.